My husband thought a 2-week trip to the Maldives was a generous gift to heal my burnout. In reality, it was just an expensive distraction so he could play house with his mistress right here in the city. I never boarded that plane. Instead, I used a duplicate keycard to walk straight into their hotel suite. He paid for a vacation, but I made sure he paid for his betrayal with everything he owned. My name is Elena Vance, and as I sat at the marble dining table of our Manhattan penthouse, I could feel the suffocation setting in long before I knew the reason why. The morning sunlight pierced through the tempered glass, illuminating the breakfast Julian had laid out with a precision that felt entirely too staged. The rich aroma of premium roasted coffee beans battled for dominance with his expensive Hugo Boss cologne, creating a cloying scent of manufactured success and performative care. My chest felt heavy, compressed by an invisible pressure that had nothing to do with the altitude. The only sounds in the room were the sharp, dry clinks of silver knives hitting porcelain plates, puncturing the strained silence that had been the third member of our marriage for months. Julian slid a cream-colored envelope across the cold stone surface toward me. The gold foil logo of the airline caught the light. His eyes crinkled with a solicitude so calculated that an Academy Award winner would have studied his technique with envy. In a smooth, baritone voice, he told me that I looked absolutely exhausted after the company merger project. He insisted that I deserved a complete disconnection from reality, a trip to a 6-star resort in the Maldives for 2 weeks. I looked at my husband's smile and realized the corners of his eyes lacked the crinkles of genuine mirth. It was just the tension of facial muscles straining to conceal his desperate impatience to get me out of the house. I picked up the ticket. The edge of the paper felt sharp against my thumb, less like a loving gift and more like a deportation order. My mind flashed back to the nights Julian came home late, citing board meetings, yet his collar always carried a faint, foreign scent. It was not perfume, but the smell of youth and recklessness, a synthetic blend of mint and vanilla vape smoke. My intuition, sharpened by 10 years of navigating cutthroat boardrooms, screamed that this sudden generosity was the death knell of our union. He moved behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders and resting his chin near my ear. He whispered sweet nothings about how much he would miss me, but his body remained rigid, creating a chasm between us even as our skin touched. I could hear his heart beating faster than usual. It was not the rhythm of passion. It was the erratic thumping of anxiety, the adrenaline spike of a liar who realizes he is about to succeed. I swallowed the nausea rising in my throat, forced my lips into a weak smile, and thanked him, playing the role of the grateful, oblivious wife to perfection. Julian left for work with a spring in his step that was almost insulting. I stood alone in the vast, cold kitchen, the solitude wrapping around me like a damp fog. I stared at the ticket, then at my silent phone, wondering if I was simply paranoid. Then my gaze drifted to the shared iPad we used to control the smart home system. The screen lit up with a calendar notification he had neglected to hide. It read, "President Suite reservation at the Onyx Hotel for 3 nights. The words hit me with the physical force of a slap. The Onyx was the most luxurious hotel in the city center, a mere 20 minutes from our home by car, not the business trip to Chicago he had claimed. My blood ran cold, freezing in my veins before boiling over into a sharp, focused rage. Every disparate piece of the puzzle from the last few months suddenly clicked into place. The whispered calls, the hidden receipts, the physical distance in our bed. It all formed a complete, grotesque picture of betrayal. I did not cry. Instead, I walked into my dressing room and pulled down my vintage Hermes suitcase. I did not reach for bikinis or flowy maxi dresses. I selected black garments. I packed sharp, tailored suits that projected power and authority, and stiletto heels that would strike the floor with the heavy finality of a judge's gavel. When I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound tore through the room like the cocking of a loaded gun. I was not going to the Maldives. I was going straight into the heart of his deception. I picked up my phone and dialed my trusted assistant at the law firm. My voice was steady as I requested a full forensic accounting dossier on Stark Industries. Julian was running the company, but the initial capital had come entirely from my family. I needed to know exactly what was happening, not just in our bedroom, but in our bank accounts. I ended the call and stood before the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me no longer looked tired or resigned. Her eyes burned with a ruthless determination. I sat in the back of a black Uber, parked far enough down the street from the entrance to Julian's office building to remain unseen. Behind my sunglasses, I watched every movement in the main lobby. A cold drizzle had started, the fat drops streaking down the glass like running mascara, mirroring the controlled chaos inside me. I saw him emerge. He was not alone. He was with a young woman, her hair a rebellious shock of platinum blonde, her fashion edgy but undeniably expensive. I knew who she was. Sienna, the new creative director Julian had hired 6 months ago, the one he constantly praised as a young talent and a fresh perspective for the company. I watched him open the town car's door for her, his hand resting on the small of her back, far too familiar for a colleague. The look that passed between them was not professional respect. It was raw, unfiltered desire. The sight was a knife twisting in my gut, but I did not look away. I forced myself to absorb every detail, to burn the image into my memory, letting the pain metabolize into pure, cold strength. Julian's car pulled away, heading toward the Onyx. I signaled my driver. "Follow that car. Stay a safe distance back, but do not lose them." The rhythmic swoosh of the tires on the wet pavement was the only sound, a monotonous counterpoint to the heavy, panicked thumping of my heart. I pulled out my phone and accessed the security system for our apartment, the one I had secretly installed last month. The feed showed an empty home. He was not coming back for anything. I had cut off my own retreat. When we arrived at the Onyx, I did not get out. I watched through the massive revolving glass doors as Julian and Sienna approached the reception desk. The grand crystal chandelier in the lobby illuminated Sienna's radiant smile as she leaned into Julian's side, the perfect picture of a happy couple checking in for a romantic getaway. A bitter, acrid taste rose in my throat. It was the taste of betrayal, fermented for months, now overflowing as pure poison. I dialed a number from memory. "Marcus," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. Marcus was an old friend, now a senior vice president for the entire hotel chain. I asked him for a small favor. I lied smoothly, telling him I wanted to surprise Julian for our anniversary and needed a secondary keycard to the president's suite to decorate it before he arrived. Marcus, trusting my family's name and our history, did not question it for a second. He agreed immediately, instructing me to see the floor manager on duty for the key. Holding the cold, plastic card in my hand, I felt like I was grasping the key to Pandora's box. I stepped into the elevator, the mirrored walls reflecting a woman I almost did not recognize. I watched the floor numbers climb, each electronic ting a countdown to the final judgment. In that confined, mirrored space, I adjusted the collar of my coat and reapplied my lipstick, a deep, blood red. I was preparing for the most important performance of my life. The hallway leading to the president's suite was carpeted in a thick velvet that swallowed the sound of my footsteps, creating an eerie silence, the kind that comes just before a hurricane. The abstract paintings on the walls seemed to stare at me with distorted, mocking eyes. I took a deep, shuddering breath, willing my hands to stop trembling. It was not fear. It was a dizzying, dangerous rush of adrenaline. Before sliding the card into the lock, I pressed my ear against the heavy oak door. I listened. Absolute silence. They were not in the room. They were still downstairs, most likely at the bar or in the restaurant, giving me the golden opportunity I needed to set the stage. The electronic lock beeped, a single, sterile sound, and a small green light flashed. I pushed the door open and stepped into the darkness of the palatial suite. The president's suite was vast and opulent to the point of being overwhelming, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the New York City skyline glittering in the night. As soon as I stepped deeper into the room, a heavy scent assaulted my senses. It was the smell of fresh lilies arranged in expensive crystal vases on every available surface. Julian knew perfectly well that I was allergic to lilies, but he also knew that Sienna absolutely adored them. That small, thoughtless detail made my anger flare brighter than before. It was the final confirmation that in this relationship, my preferences and my comfort had been entirely erased. I did not turn on the lights. I let the ambient glow from the skyscrapers outside guide me as I moved like a ghost between the pieces of Italian leather furniture. I inspected every corner of the scene he had set. There was a bottle of champagne chilling in a silver ice bucket, a platter of strawberries dipped in chocolate, and rose petals scattered across the white duvet of the king-sized bed. Every single element of this romantic preparation had been paid for with money from our joint account, money that I had worked tirelessly to earn. I found the perfect position to conceal myself and wait. In a shadowed corner of the living area, there was a dark blue velvet armchair. It faced the entrance and the bed, yet it was tucked away in the gloom, obscured by the lack of direct light. I sat down, feeling the cold velvet seep through the fabric of my dress. It felt less like a piece of furniture and more like a throne of judgment. I was a queen waiting for her traitorous subjects to arrive. Time passed with agonizing slowness. Every second that ticked by stretched my nerves tighter. The second hand of the wall clock moved with a rhythmic tick that sounded like the countdown of a time bomb in the silent room. I took out my phone and ensured it was on silent mode. I opened the voice recorder and the camera application, propping the device carefully on a bookshelf just behind the chair. The lens had a clear view of the room. This was not just about revenge. This was about gathering irrefutable legal evidence. Hunger and fatigue began to attack me, but I brushed them aside. I took a sip of water from a small bottle I had brought. Feeling the cool liquid soothe my dry throat, I recalled the beautiful memories I once shared with Julian, the vows we had made to each other, and I ruthlessly crushed them in my mind until not a shred of compassion remained. I needed to be cold. I needed to be cruel. I had to become a different person to survive the night. Suddenly, there was a noise from the hallway. Footsteps and the sound of giggling echoed closer, shattering the silence of the suite. My heart skipped a beat, then began to hammer against my ribs as if it wanted to burst out of my chest. Hot blood rushed to my head, making my ears ring. I gripped the armrests of the chair, my fingernails digging deep into the velvet fabric, and forced myself to regulate my breathing. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The electronic lock beeped. The latch clicked open. The door swung inward, and a wedge of bright light from the hallway sliced across the room, cutting through the darkness like a blade. Julian's voice drifted in, slurred with alcohol and heavy with lust. He told her to welcome to paradise. Sienna replied in a voice dripping with suggestion that she could not wait any longer. They stepped inside, and the door slammed shut, plunging the room back into the dim city-lit gloom. I sat as motionless as a statue, my eyes wide as I watched the two dark silhouettes entangle themselves right in the entryway. The wet sounds of kissing and the rustle of clothing were amplified in the quiet space. I waited, patient as a predator watching its prey walk blindly into a trap. Drunk on lust. Julian and Sienna staggered toward the bed, their mouths locked, their hands fumbling with each other's clothes. They were completely oblivious to the third presence in the room. Sienna giggled as Julian worked on the zipper of her dress, shrugging off her expensive coat. He tossed it carelessly onto the floor, where it landed in a heap, mere inches from my feet. The moment that coat settled on the carpet, I knew the time for waiting was over. I could not let this profane performance go any further. I reached out a steady hand and clicked on the tall floor lamp beside my chair. A brilliant, warm light instantly flooded the corner, tearing through the darkness and illuminating the two adulterers frozen in the middle of the room. "Don't rush," I said. My voice was calm, cold, and sharp as a shard of ice, cutting straight through the heavy, erotic atmosphere. It was like throwing a bucket of Arctic water on them. Julian recoiled so violently he nearly fell over. He spun around, his eyes stretching wide in pure, unadulterated terror. His face, which had been flushed with arousal and alcohol, drained of all color, becoming a sickly, pale white. Sienna let out a high-pitched, theatrical shriek. She instinctively crossed her arms over her chest and scrambled to hide behind Julian, her eyes bulging as she stared at me like I was a ghost who had just materialized from the wall. A dead, suffocating silence fell over the suite, broken only by the sound of their ragged, panicked breathing. Elena Julian stammered, his voice cracking and dissolving. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be on a plane." He tried to take a step forward, a pathetic attempt to shield Sienna from my view, but his legs were trembling so badly he looked like a marionette with its strings cut. I remained seated in the armchair, my legs crossed elegantly, my gaze fixed on my husband as if he were a particularly disgusting insect I had just found squirming on my floor. The plane was delayed. I lied, a small, sarcastic smile playing on my lips. "And I thought I should come here and surprise my loving husband. It looks like you had a rather big surprise planned for me as well, didn't you?" My eyes flicked over to Sienna, who was visibly shaking behind Julian's arm. My gaze was as sharp as a scalpel, peeling back the layers of her fake confidence. Sienna seemed to regain a fraction of her composure, the shock giving way to the horrified realization of her new reality. She tried to find her dress, but it was still tangled around her. "You told me you were separated," she hissed at Julian, her voice a mix of fear and the fury of a woman who knows she has also been played. Julian turned to her, his expression a mask of desperation. "I can explain," he floundered. I rose from the chair. I did it slowly, with deliberate, queenly grace. The sharp click of my stilettos on the hardwood floor was the only sound, echoing like a hammer driving nails into a coffin. I walked toward them, not with the hysteria of a wronged wife, but with the cold, controlled anger of an executioner. "There is no need to explain. Julian," I said, reaching over to the bookshelf and plucking my phone from its hiding place. I held it up. The screen glowed, the video still clearly recording, capturing their two horrified faces. "Everything is perfectly clear." Julian's eyes locked onto the phone. The fear in them was instantly replaced by a primal, cornered animal desperation. He knew what that recording meant. He knew it was the end of his reputation, his career, everything he had built on my family's money. He lunged at me, his hand outstretched. "Give me that, Elena. Don't do anything stupid." I took one precise step backward, just out of his reach. My eyes turned to steel. "Touch me," I threatened, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. "Touch me one more time, and the police will be here in 5 minutes for assault. Try me." Julian froze, his hands dropping uselessly to his sides. He finally understood that he was completely, utterly powerless against this new, steel-hard version of his wife. So, he switched tactics. The anger vanished, replaced by a pathetic, groveling desperation. His voice became oily and pleading. "Elena, please, just listen to me. This was just a mistake. It was a moment of weakness. I was drunk. I love you. You know I love you." The same smooth lies he had always used now sounded cheap and disgusting, even to his own ears. "Love me." I let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor, only contempt. "Do you love me by using our joint credit card to buy her flowers, by lying about a business trip so you could be with her here? You don't love anyone, Julian. You only love yourself and your massive, fragile ego. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick stack of printed receipts, throwing them onto the coffee table. The papers fanned out, scattering like dead white butterflies across the dark wood. Sienna, who had managed to pull her wrinkled dress back on, tried to salvage the last scraps of her pride. She stepped out from behind Julian, lifting her chin in a defiant gesture. Don't put all the blame on him. Your marriage was already dead. If you were a good wife, he wouldn't have needed me. It was a low, pathetic psychological blow, an attempt to shift the blame by attacking my worth. I turned my gaze to her, and my eyes held no hatred, only a cold, clinical pity. You think you're special, don't you? Sienna, you think he's going to leave his wife and marry you. I took a slow step closer to the younger woman, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper that still managed to fill the entire room. You're just the new toy. Before you, it was his old secretary. Before her, it was our yoga instructor. You are just one more name on a very long, very sad list of foolish women who actually believed his promises. Sienna's face went pale. She spun to look at Julian, her eyes wide with doubt, searching his face for a denial. But Julian just stared at the floor, refusing to meet the gaze of either of us. His silence was the loudest, most damning confession. Sienna staggered back as if she had been struck. Her manufactured arrogance completely dissolved, replaced by a wave of crushing, humiliating shame. And Julian, I said, turning back to my husband, my voice hardening. Did you really think I didn't know? Did you think I had no idea you were secretly siphoning money from our joint fund into a private account in the Caymans? Did you think I was just some stupid, dutiful doll you kept at home? Someone who didn't understand the numbers. This was the attack he never saw coming. The one aimed directly at the financial deception he thought he had hidden so well. Julian's eyes bulged. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. How did you know? He stammered. This was real panic. He was not afraid of losing his wife. He was terrified of losing his money and, more importantly, going to prison for it. I smiled, a thin, triumphant smile of someone holding every ace in the deck. I was the one who rebuilt your entire accounting system last year after your last CFO nearly bankrupted you. Remember every transaction, every transfer, every single number. I see it all. I have it all. The air in the room became so thick with tension it was difficult to breathe. Julian finally understood. He was not just losing his wife. He was facing the total annihilation of his entire life. He suddenly collapsed, not in a faint, but in a complete surrender. He fell to his knees in front of me and grabbed onto my legs, his tears and snot staining my dress. I am sorry. I am sorry. Elena, please, don't do this. Don't ruin me. We can fix this. We can start over. The image of the powerful, successful man he projected to the world shattered, leaving only this pathetic, weeping wretch at my feet. Just as Julian's pathetic sobs reached a crescendo, a rapid, insistent ringing at the suite door cut through the tragicomic performance. The sound was sharp and demanding. All three of us started, our heads snapping toward the door. A cold, faint smile touched my lips. I stepped away from my groveling husband and walked to the door, opening it wide. On the threshold stood two imposing men in severe dark suits and a sharp, middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. It was my personal attorney, Rachel Stone, flanked by two forensic accountants. Right on time, I said, stepping aside to grant them entry. Julian scrambled to his feet, staggering backward, his face now completely drained of blood. Who are these people? What the hell are you doing? Elena, he shrieked, his voice cracking in total panic. Rachel walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture, placing a thick, hard-bound legal file on the coffee table. The sound of the file hitting the wood was as heavy and final as a death sentence. "Good evening." "Mr. Vance," Rachel said, her voice crisp, professional, and devoid of all emotion. "We represent Ms. Elena Vance. These are unilateral divorce papers, filed on grounds of adultery and financial malfeasance. We are also serving you with this." She slid a document from the top, an emergency court order to freeze all marital and corporate assets, pending an investigation into suspected fraudulent conveyance. She pushed the stack of papers toward him. Each word was a bullet, systematically destroying the last vestiges of hope in his eyes, seeing the situation escalate to a legal crisis. Sienna panicked. She snatched her purse from the floor and made a desperate dash for the door. "I have nothing to do with this. I'm leaving." But one of the men in the dark suits moved with surprising speed, blocking her path. His voice was polite but unyielding. "Apologies, Ms. Sienna. You are also named as a material witness in a complaint regarding the misappropriation of corporate funds. We must insist you remain for a moment." The room imploded into chaos. Julian finally snapped. He started screaming, calling me a venomous snake, a cold-hearted bitch. He grabbed a crystal tumbler from the bar cart and hurled it against the wall, where it shattered, sending a spray of glass shards across the floor. "You set me up," he roared, his face a grotesque mask of rage and powerlessness. "You planned this." All of it. I stood with my arms crossed, watching his meltdown with a calm, detached interest. "No one set you up. Julian, your own greed and your own lies led you right here, to this room. I'm just the one cleaning up the mess you made." I nodded to Rachel, signaling her to ignore his tantrum and proceed. Rachel, unfazed, began to read from a summary sheet. She detailed, with brutal precision, every illicit expenditure Julian had made on Sienna: the down payment for the luxury high-rise apartment, the lease on the new sports car, the first-class tickets for their numerous business trips. She explained that all these funds had been traced back, not to his salary, but to the venture capital fund that I had personally guaranteed with my own family's collateral. With every number Rachel read aloud, it was like another nail being driven into Sienna's coffin as well as Julian's. Sienna's face crumpled. She wasn't just the other woman. She was a named accomplice in a federal embezzlement case. Julian's rage evaporated, replaced by a crushing, absolute defeat. He stumbled backward and fell heavily onto the sofa, his body folding in on itself. He dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking. He finally, truly, understood that his life, as he knew it, was over. There was no escape. There was no fixing this. I looked at him, the man I had once loved, now just a broken shell. The initial surge of victorious adrenaline began to fade, leaving a strange, hollow emptiness in its place. I realized, with chilling clarity, that this pathetic creature had never been worthy of my love, or even my anger. Cornered and seeing no other way out, Sienna instantly turned on Julian. She began to shriek, her voice shrill and panicked, causing the mascara to run in dark rivulets down her face. She shouted at him that he had told her the money was his performance bonus. She screamed that he had claimed to be the chairman and that he had the right to spend it. She accused him of lying to her and making her into a thief. The fissure between the two traitors cracked wide open right in front of me, a pathetic and laughable display of self-preservation. Julian lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot and filled with pure hatred as he looked at his lover. He yelled at her to shut her mouth. He demanded to know if he would have had to take those risks if she had not demanded that Hermes bag or the first-class trip to Paris. He blamed her vanity for his crimes. The two people who had whispered eternal vows to each other just an hour ago were now tearing each other apart like wounded animals, desperate to shift the blame. I watched the scene unfold and felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. I walked over to the side table and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was rock steady. I saw their true nature now. They were selfish, cowardly people who were ready to trample on anyone to survive. I felt a profound sense of relief that I had never had children with this man. Rachel stepped forward and held out a heavy fountain pen to Julian. She instructed him to sign the document on the table. It was a formal agreement to resign from all executive positions and transfer his entire equity stake in the company to me to cover the financial damages. She told him plainly that if he did not sign, the file would be on the desk of a federal prosecutor by the next morning. This was the ultimatum, the final blow I had meticulously prepared. Julian took the pen, his hand trembling violently. He looked up at me one last time, his eyes wet and pleading, searching for a shred of the affection I once held for him. He used my old nickname, Ness, and reminded me that we had been together for 10 years. He asked if I truly wanted to drive him to a dead end. He was trying to use our past as a shield, hoping I would soften. I looked straight into his eyes, my gaze a frozen ocean with no ripple of emotion. I told him that those 10 years died the moment he brought her into the bed we used to share. I told him to sign the paper. I gave him the choice to either lose the company or lose his freedom. I told him the choice was entirely his. My voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute authority of a queen passing a sentence. Julian ground his teeth together. He pressed the pen to the paper and scrawled his signature with a violent motion. The sound of the nib scratching against the paper was harsh and jarring in the silent room. In that fleeting moment, he signed away not just his assets, but his honor and his future. He threw the pen onto the floor and slumped forward, burying his face in his arms on the table as his shoulders shook with sobs. I picked up the document and checked the signature carefully. It was legally binding. I handed the paper to Rachel. I said it was done. My voice felt light, as if a weight of 1,000 pounds had just been lifted from my shoulders. I turned around and walked toward the door, leaving my devastated ex-husband and his terrified mistress behind me. I did not look back once. I stepped out of the hotel room, and the quiet stillness of the empty hallway was a welcome relief. The door to room 210 clicked shut behind me, a soft but definitive sound. It was the sound of a final, heavy lock clicking into place, sealing all the filth and chaos inside. I took a deep breath. The air in the hallway smelled of new carpet and industrial air freshener, but to me, it was as clean and fresh as the open sky. I was free. Down in the lobby, the rain had stopped. The streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, glittering like a million shattered diamonds. I walked through the automatic doors, and the cold night air hit my face, a bracing slap that made me feel more alive and sober than I had in a decade. I did not hail a cab immediately. I just stood there for a moment, watching the traffic and the anonymous pedestrians rush by. I felt as if I had just returned from another dimension, a bloody and personal war from which I was the only survivor. My phone began to vibrate incessantly in my coat pocket. It was a relentless barrage of texts and missed calls from Julian. The messages were a chaotic mix of vitriolic curses, pathetic apologies, and veiled threats. I calmly pulled the phone out, opened his contact, and pressed the block button. I did the same for Sienna's number. I was performing a digital detox, a surgical removal of the malignant tumors that had been poisoning my life. With a steady hand, I dialed my mother, the only person in the world I trusted completely right now. She answered on the second ring. "Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm done. It's over. I'm coming home." Her voice came through the line, warm and anxious, but a port in the storm. "Come home, darling. The door is unlocked. I've made you your favorite soup." As I heard her words, the steel armor I had worn all night finally cracked. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief, the kind that only come when you know you finally have a safe place to land. In the back of the taxi, I watched the New York City skyline glide past the window. The towering skyscrapers were still standing, The city's relentless pulse was still beating. Life was moving on, completely indifferent to the personal tragedy that had just imploded in that hotel suite. I found a strange comfort in that. My pain was just a grain of sand in the desert of a million other stories, and like them, it would be swept away by the wind. My thoughts turned to the future, to Stark Industries, the company that was now, unequivocally, mine. There would be a mountain of work to do. I had to clean up the financial mess Julian had left, reassure the board and the shareholders, and rebuild the brand. But instead of feeling daunted, I felt a new, unfamiliar energy rising inside me. I would run that company 1,000 times better than he ever did. I would show the world, and myself, who the real power was. When the taxi pulled up to my mother's house, I stepped out onto the quiet, familiar street. I walked into my childhood bedroom, a place where everything was exactly as it had been before Julian, before the penthouse, before the betrayal. I lay down on the small, twin-sized bed and pulled the quilt up to my chin, the scent of home and safety enveloping me. I knew that tonight I would sleep. I would sleep deeply, with no anxiety, no suspicion, and no strange perfume on my husband's collar, before I let my eyes close. I picked up my phone one last time and opened the airline app. The ticket to the Maldives was still there, unused. I smiled. I pressed the cancel flight button. I did not need a vacation to heal. The best healing had been cutting the cancer out of my life with my own 2 hands, and I had just done it. 3 months later, the executive offices of Stark Industries were unrecognizable. The gaudy, ostentatious paintings Julian had chosen to project a facade of power were gone. In their place hung minimalist, sophisticated art pieces that I had selected. The entire floor felt lighter, more focused. I sat at the head of the boardroom table, in the large chair that was now mine by every right. I calmly directed the board meeting, my voice steady and my arguments sharp. The old guard shareholders, men who had once dismissed me as Julian's quiet wife, now listened with an impressed, almost fearful, respect. No one mentioned Julian Vance. He was not a pariah, he was simply irrelevant, a faded memory from a bad business quarter. News of the scandal had, of course, rippled through our industry. But the narrative had been expertly controlled by the crisis management team I had hired within an hour of leaving that hotel. Julian was not the victim of a vindictive wife. He was the perpetrator of gross financial misconduct. He was forced to leave the city in absolute disgrace, living off the meager trust fund pittance that my lawyers had not been able to legally attach to his debts. The last I heard, he was managing a dive bar in a forgotten suburb, drowning his regrets in cheap whiskey every night. As for Sienna, she was fired the morning after the incident for cause, specifically for being a co-recipient of embezzled company funds. The story of her involvement made her toxic. She was blacklisted from every creative agency in the city. No one would hire a woman with such a catastrophic lack of judgment and ethics. She had been forced to pack up her expensive, ill-gotten wardrobe and move back to her parents' house in the Midwest. Her dreams of a glamorous New York life reduced to a cautionary tale. It was a steep price to pay for a few months of luxury. I, on the other hand, began to truly enjoy my new life as a powerful, single woman. I attended charity galas, not as a +1, but as a benefactor. I met new partners, genuinely successful and intelligent men who looked at me with open admiration. They respected me for my mind and my accomplishments, not for my attachment to another man. I was in no hurry to complicate my life. I was relishing the sweet, quiet taste of my own freedom. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was walking in Central Park, the yellow leaves crunching satisfyingly under my boots. On a bench nearby, I saw a couple in the middle of a hushed, intense argument. The woman was crying, and the man was looking away, his jaw tight with avoidance. The scene, which once would have felt like a dagger to my heart, now felt distant, like watching a movie I had already seen. It did not trigger my pain. It only reminded me of the long, dark tunnel I had successfully navigated. I stopped at a cart and bought a cup of black coffee. The taste was sharp, slightly bitter, and wonderfully invigorating. I stood by the lake, watching the water ripple, and I had a realization. True happiness was not about finding the right man. It was about finding peace within myself. It was the absolute control I now had over my own life, my own finances, and my own future. I took a deep breath of the cool fall air, and my lungs felt expansive, my entire body humming with a new, vibrant energy. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was an email from a business partner in Paris. He was inviting me to attend Fashion Week, not just as a guest, but to finalize the details of our European market expansion. Paris, the city of light, the city of new beginnings. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. This time, I would go. I would not be going to escape or to heal. I would be going to conquer. I typed out my reply, "I'll be there." I slid the phone back into my pocket, straightened the collar of my trench coat, and continued my walk. My shadow was long and strong on the path, the silhouette of a woman who had burned her past to the ground and had, finally, risen from the ashes. Just as I was folding the last silk blouse into my suitcase for Paris, thinking the turbulence of my life had finally settled into a smooth glide, my phone rang. It was midnight. The caller ID displayed a number I recognized immediately, the dedicated line for the private banking division in Zurich. The banker's voice was urgent. He informed me that there was an active attempt to access the Black Trust, a shadow account Julian believed was his ultimate safety net. He thought he was the only one with the alphanumeric key to that vault. He was wrong. I had held the master key since the day he opened it, waiting for the moment he would be desperate enough to use it. This was his endgame, a reckless, final gambit to flip the board. I did not panic. I did not even stand up. I simply opened my laptop and accessed the real-time security feed of the location associated with the login attempt. The screen flickered to life, revealing a grainy, black-and-white image of a dingy internet cafe on the outskirts of the city. And there he was, Julian. He looked nothing like the man who had sipped champagne in a penthouse 3 months ago. He was gaunt, unshaven, and his eyes darted around manically. He was hunched over a greasy keyboard, frantically typing in old passwords, trying to unlock the $5 million he had secretly embezzled and stashed away 5 years ago as his plan B. Instead of blocking him immediately, I decided to play a game. I wanted to give him hope before I crushed it. I authorized the system to let him pass the first security layer, then the second. I watched his posture change on the screen. I could practically see the twisted, triumphant smile forming on his lips as the green light flashed, signaling access granted. His heart must have been pounding against his ribs like a war drum. He thought he had won. He thought he was seconds away from stealing $5 million and disappearing to a tropical island to plot his revenge against me. He navigated to the transfer screen. I watched his finger hover over the enter key. He pressed it. At that exact second, I executed a command code I had planted in the system months ago, a little program I affectionately called the Trojan Horse. The transfer did not go through. Instead, the screen in that internet cafe froze. Then, it began to play a video on a loop. It was the high-definition footage of him and Sienna in the hotel room that night, their betrayal playing out in vivid color. Overlaid on the video, flashing in bright red letters, were the words, "Game over." Simultaneously, the silent alarm I had rigged to the account triggered, but it did not just alert the bank. I had rerouted the connection signal directly to the Cybercrime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. On Julian's screen, the video vanished, replaced by a digital warrant for his arrest on charges of international financial fraud and money laundering. By attempting to move that money, he had provided the final, irrefutable proof of his intent to launder stolen funds. I had not just blocked him, I had handed him to the authorities on a silver platter. Through the cafe's security camera, which I had easily hacked, I saw the flashing red and blue lights wash over the storefront. A SWAT team kicked in the door. Julian barely had time to stand up before he was tackled to the dirty linoleum floor. I watched as the cold steel of handcuffs was snapped around his wrists. As they dragged him out, he looked directly up at the security camera in the corner of the ceiling. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of pure hatred and terrifying realization. He screamed my name, a silent howl on my muted laptop, knowing that I was watching him. He was a trapped animal, and he finally knew who the hunter was. I closed my laptop with a soft snap. A profound sense of satisfaction warmed every cell in my body. This was the true ending. I had not just taken his money, I had taken his freedom. I had ensured that he could never, ever harm me again. I picked up my glass of red wine and took a long, slow sip. The vintage tasted of dark cherries and oak, but mostly, it tasted of absolute victory. The next morning, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I pulled my silver suitcase out the front door and stepped into the waiting taxi that would take me to JFK Airport. We passed a newsstand on the corner. The bold black headline on the morning paper read, "Former Stark Industries CEO arrested in midnight raid for money laundering." I glanced at it, offered a small, knowing smile, and put on my sunglasses to shield my eyes from the bright sun. The taxi merged into the traffic, heading toward the airport and my flight to Paris. I was leaving the wreckage of the past behind in New York. Under that vast blue sky, I, Elena Vance, was finally, truly free. I had not been saved by a vacation my husband gave me. I had saved myself. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.